Hello guys, and welcome back to Introduction to Number Theory. In this video we will talk about Chinese remainders theorem. But we'll start from a Chinese zodiac. We know that the Chinese horoscope, Chinese zodiac, has 12 animals and 5 elements. I don't actually know what these animals are. I just know that there are 12 of them, but if you're interested, you can read about it in some other occasion. All I know is that each animal corresponds to 1 year. Well, actually, for a year, there is an animal that corresponds to this year. 1 year, one animal, the next year, another animal. The next year, another animal, and so on. So each year has its own animal. And as for the elements, 2 years correspond to one element, and the next 2 years correspond to another element, and the next 2 years correspond to another element. So the length of the cycle for elements is 10 years. Each element repeats in 10 years. At the same time, each animal repeats in 12 years, since there are 12 animals and each year has its own animal. For instance, let's consider a famous Chinese mathematician, Chen, who made a great contribution to number theory and proved that every even number can be represented as a prime plus, well, not necessarily prime, but the product of 2 primes. And we know the famous Goldbach conjecture that every positive even number can be represented as the sum of 2 primes. Well, it's not, nobody can prove it or disprove it, but Chen proved that every positive even number can be represented as the sum of a prime and product of 2 primes. So Chen was born in the year 1933, and the 1933 is congruent to 1 modulo 12, which means that this was the year of a rooster, and 1933 is congruent to 3 modulo 10, which means that element of this year, 1933, is water. So, according to Chinese zodiac, Chen was a water rooster. Well, okay, I don't know if it helped him prove his theorems, marvelous theorems, or not, but as is. So we have 12 animals and 5 elements. Animals repeat in every 12 years. Each animal repeats in every 12 years. Each element repeats in 10 years. How many combinations of animals and elements are there? Well, of course, 60 combinations, 60 possible combinations of animal and an element. And a combination for a certain year depends on the remainder of this year modulo 10, which defines the element, and the remainder of this year modulo 12, which defines the animal. And this brings us to Chinese remainder theorem. Well, the Chinese remainder theorem is stated in the central and lower part of the slide. Given a system of congruences, x congruent to a1 modulo m1, x congruent to a2 modulo m2, and so on, a finite system of congruences where these moduli are pairwise mutually prime. Well, of course, 10 and 12 are not quite mutually prime. They simply have a common divisor 2. But nevertheless, the main Chinese remainder theorem assumes that moduli are mutually prime, pairwise mutually prime. So given such a system with arbitrary right-hand sides, I mean A1, A2, A3, and so on, this system has a solution. And the meaning of this theorem for Chinese zodiac means that each animal meets each element. So for each combination, there is a year that corresponds to this combination. Okay, so this system of congruences has a solution, and this solution is unique when considered modular m1 multiplied by m2 multiplied by and so on. So is unique modular the product of all of the original moduli of the system. So in our further videos, we will prove the Chinese remainder theorem. And the last thing I want to say is that Chinese remainder theorem with pairwise mutually prime moduli actually helps solve systems of congruences where moduli are not mutually prime.